I know it's kind of a leap today as we think about last Sunday. We were in Philippians, and we are jumping all the way back to the book of Exodus this week, and that's quite a leap. But we're still continuing our thought on the Pressing On series, and so I think you'll find that in this passage that theme does resonate with Moses and with this passage. It really does come through. What we have here in this passage is a leader on the edge, really. Moses has come to the place where God has asked him to do things that he doesn't really understand. And Moses and God had a pretty good connection, and Moses just tells God what he feels. He doesn't hold anything back. And Moses is basically saying, God, you've told me you want me to do this. You've told me you want me to take the people from here to there, to the promised land. And we're leaving Sinai for the promised land. You've told me to do it, but you haven't really explained to me how you want me to do it. And who's going to help me do it? I don't have a lot of instruction here, and it's kind of like I felt and others felt. When I graduated from seminary and began pastoring the church, and all the Greek and the Hebrew that I learned and all the stuff that I learned in class didn't really apply to all the practical stuff in churches. When it came to church politics and people that were hurting and people that were dying, and some of that stuff was great in the classroom, and I kept waiting to be able to apply that, but for the most part, a lot of it was things that helped me in my sermons, but it wasn't something that really helped me in direction for being a pastor. And so, as a leader, sometimes we get a little discouraged and we get a little on the edge sometimes, and we think, I don't know, God, you told me this, you want me to do this, but I don't know if I'm adequate enough to do this. So we get discouraged. It happens more than we think, maybe more than we will even willing to admit. That, one of the things that I have learned as a pastor is that you can't please everybody. It's just not something you can do. And so, I can preach a sermon, and one person will come up and say they love that series, and another person said they didn't really care for it. So you really can't please everybody. I've learned that a long time ago. But at the same time, you still want to be able to be effective in your ministry. And then there are those times where you just feel like you're very inadequate for the task that God has given you to do pretty much every Sunday morning. Like, man, what do I do with this? And sometimes you just kind of like Moses. Lord, I know that, Moses says basically, you've told me you know me by name, and you seem to like me, but I need more. I need more than that. I need there's something that I need from you that I don't feel like I'm getting. So as I look at this passage, there are basically three things that Moses wants from God, and three things that you and I want from God. They're really the same thing. And the first thing is this: Moses is asking and wanting an understanding of God's purpose. He really wants to know, God, what's this all about? What's this all about? Look at verse 12 in chapter 33, if you're following along. If not, I'll read it to you. Chapter 33, verse 12, Moses said to the Lord, "See, you have said to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and also found favor in my sight. Now, if I found favor in your sight, show me your ways, so that I may know you and find favor in your sight." Show me your ways, God. Give me an understanding of what's going on. What is the purpose behind this? And what are the plans that you have? Where are we going and why? And You know, sometimes we get to that place in life and we think, you know, if I could just understand why this is happening to me, then I would be able to press on. God doesn't always reveal that, does He? God doesn't always give us a play-by-play action and a detailed plan like some of us want. Some of us are very detail-oriented, and we go into life, and if we work in a job or whatever, we want a plan. We want to know what's expected of me. I want a job description, and this is what I expect, and this is what you expect. But sometimes God's plans and God's purposes are not so detailed. They're a little more vague. God will say to us, I want you to do this, or I want you to do that. I want you to go. But He doesn't tell us where we're going, or He wants you to go and He doesn't tell you why or how He's going to help you do this. Sometimes that's frustrating because we are wired to know what. And you know, from a child, we grow up and our parents ask us to do something and we say, but why? And the parents will say, because I told you. And sometimes we are like that with God, and God will say, I want you to do this. And we'll say, but why, God? And God says, because I told you so. I want you to trust me. But boy, that's hard sometimes. We're just not wired that way. But we want to at least know that God has a purpose in what we're doing, that it's not just something that makes no sense. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to us. And sometimes the plan of God, as it begins to unfold, may start to make sense, but sometimes it takes a while. It may take years for us to look back in the past and say, oh, wait a minute. I see now. I see what you were doing. I understand a little bit about that. That even the times when I veered off the path, God, you used that too. And you had a purpose, and you had a plan. It's sort of like looking at, you know, a pattern from the wrong side. It doesn't make sense. Or a puzzle that isn't put together. And finally it begins to take shape and begins to make sense. And you begin in it. And for some of us, that may not even happen until we get to glory. We may not understand why things happen, and the mysteries of God may stay mysteries to us until we get to heaven. But sometimes God does reveal at least a few things to us, and we begin to understand. But even in this situation, God doesn't explain everything to Moses. But another thing that Moses is wanting is, besides an understanding of God's purpose, is he wants an awareness of God's presence. And I think more than anything else, this is what we need. It's just an awareness of God's presence. You know, God has told us, I'll never leave you, and we understand that. But sometimes we just need to be reminded of that, or to be made aware of that. In verse 14, he says, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. So God's telling him, I'm going to give you my presence. And he said to him, if your presence will not go, Moses says, then don't carry us up from here. For how shall it be known that I found favor in your sight, I and your people, unless you go with us? And I don't want to go if you're not with me. In this way we shall be distinct, I and your people, from every people on the face of the earth. And then a couple times it's mentioned in this place where God says to Moses, I know your name. And Moses says, yes, you know my name. And the idea there, I think, behind all this is what we're really seeking is for the presence of God to be in our life and an intimate acquaintance. You know, the fact that you know my name says something. You know, have you ever been, you pass somebody on the street or maybe in the hallway or somewhere? It happens all the time. And somebody will come up and start talking to you, and you know you're supposed to know them. You know you should know their name, and you're like, I can't remember their name. And I'm probably one of the worst at that. And you're like, you may try it, and you may call them the wrong name, and that's very embarrassing. Or you might say, act like you know it and don't even ask. Thankfully, at the hospital, we have name tags. That's very helpful, for at least for the employees. But sometimes you may just say, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. Just be honest about it. But there's something special about knowing our names and be able to say the name. It means that I know you enough, I care about you enough to be able to say your names. And I'm working on this. I have a hard time sometimes. But Dale Carnegie one time said, the sweetest sound in any language is the sound of hearing our name. Because we want people to know. And the same thing is true with God. It reminds me of a story that I read. It was about the time back in the 70s. This was after the hippie movement had kind of faded into into oblivion. Well, it kind of did in the sunset of California. The hippies of the 60s kind of grew up. And they had to get real jobs, And many of them moved from the Haight-Ashbury place out to Santa Cruz, California, where rent was cheaper. And they all had children by now. And the thing about their children, this was, and some of you educators may appreciate this, the children's, some of their names were a little out there, Now, there were plenty of Michaels and Lisa and Charles and all that, but many of them named their kids some names that were hard to say and sometimes just a little out there, like Sunbeam or Flower or Meadow or something like that. And for the kids in kindergarten, this was, for the teachers, a difficult time. One particular teacher talked about a child that came in there. They had their name tags, and his name was Fruit Stand. He had on his thing, Fruit Stand. And she thought, well, that's a terrible name to name a child, Fruit Stand, And so she said, well, I'm just going to make the best of it. And so all day long, she just said, okay, Fruit Stand, would you want your pencil sharpened? Fruit Stand, would you like a glass of milk? Fruit Stand, all day long. And he just looked at her, never said anything, never seemed to get very close to her. But this went on all day long until finally, the end of the day, she asked him, what's the name of your bus stop? And all the kids had on the name tag, the parents had been asked to write the name of the bus stop on the reverse side of their name tag. And all of a sudden, he doesn't say anything to her. And she said, what's the name of your bus stop, Fruit Stand? He doesn't say anything. So she walks over and flips the name tag around, and it says the word Anthony. As you might imagine, it was backwards. I don't know. Fruit Stand may be a name that you would name a child, but I wouldn't think so. But the idea there is that, God knows you and I by name. Jesus talks about the hair of our head, a number. The whole idea there that God has an intimate acquaintance with you. And we think about all the billions of people in the world and the billions of people that ever lived, and we understand that God knows you. He knows everything about you. He knows you by name. He knows you intimately. He has a relationship with you even before you were even born. Well, that's pretty deep there. Think about presence. That God knows us, that we're known by our name. That to us and to God, we're not just a number. We're not just a person that God thinks, well, those people. But He knows us by name. Moses had an awareness of God's presence, and he wanted that in his life. And we all want that. Richard Rohr says, I got a quote here he's one of my favorite writers, and sometimes when I'm reading his books, I want to write down all the nuggets that he has, and sometimes I just about have to write the whole book down. But anyway, he says this about presence. We cannot attain the presence of God. Let me back up. We cannot attain the presence of God because we're already in the presence of God. What's absent is awareness. Little do we realize that God's love is maintaining us in existence with every breath we take. As we take another, it means that God is choosing us now and now and now and now. Wow. So yes, God's presence is with us, and what we really need is an awareness of that. We want to feel that presence. We want to know that presence. And that's why sometimes, like the other day, I was called to the pre-op where a lady was about to have surgery. And they called me to come and pray with her, and she had requested the chaplain. I thought maybe it was somebody I knew, but when I got there, I didn't know her and she didn't know me. But she wanted me to pray before her surgery, because I think she wanted to know and feel and be aware of that presence of God during that time. There's something about that. You know, that's why David said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. Because when we know God is with us, we can press on. We can go on. And we're known by He knows our name, and He's with us. And so we have an understanding of God's purpose and an awareness of God's presence. But finally, we also have an experience, and Moses wanted an experience of God's power. He wanted an experience of God's power. Verse 17 and 18, Moses basically, it says, God, I need more. He keeps saying, God, I know you're with me. I know that you're there, and I appreciate that, but I need more. God said, okay, what do you want? I want to experience your glory. I want to see you. You know, we've been kind of hanging out, and that's great. And we've been great buddies and all that, but I want to see you, and I want to see your glory. And God says, okay, here's what I'll do. I'm going to grant that. I'm going to put you on the rock in the cleft of the rock, and you are going to be standing there, but I'm going to hide. I'm going to take my hand and cover your eyes, because you can't see my face, or you won't be able to live. You can't survive the glory of God in your natural body. But I'll allow you to see a glimpse of my glory. As I pass by, you'll see my back, and you'll see the glory of God. And God did that for Moses. He did that very thing. And I think, beyond the fact that we want to feel the presence of God and to know the purposes of God, we want to experience the power of God. And there's all kinds of ways that people try to experience the power of God. I just finished reading a book, Salvation on Sand Mountain. It's about the snake handlers in Kentucky and Virginia, West Virginia. And they take that verse in Mark literally about they shall take up serpents. And one of the things I think that they're really wanting, they're wanting to seek the power of God. I think they do it in a bad way, but we all want that. Some of my Pentecostal brothers and sisters and charismatic brothers and sisters, that's what they're really wanting. We all want that. We want to experience the power of God, to know that God's power is going to give us what we need for the journey ahead, whatever your journey may be. Sometimes the task may be greater than you can even accomplish on your own. And you want to know God is with you, but you also want the power. Jesus told the disciples, go out and I'll go with you, and I will give you power to be witnesses of mine in all the earth. That's what the day of Pentecost was all about. The church gathered together and came together in unified form, and the power of God fell. And they were able to go and do what they needed to do. Peter stood up and preached, and thousands were saved. Maybe that's what we need today. Maybe that's what's missing in our lives today, is that Pentecost power that we need. Well, I don't know why it's missing, but I know sometimes it's not there like we once experienced it. But God's power is still real. And sometimes we get a glimpse of that. Sometimes you and I, when we're having a tough time in our life and going through the times of life, or we're at somebody's bedside, we experience just a glimpse of God's glory. Or just as the lady who was taken by the issue of blood said, if I could just but touch the hem of his garment. And sometimes all we need is a touch, just a glimpse, just a momentary picture of God's glory, and that's all we need to get us through, to press on. And so we press on because we feel that power in God in our life. Now that power may be expressed in different ways, but what it is evidence of the power is not that we can handle rattlesnakes, but it's that we can take the next step and go through the next valley, and that we can witness to other people and live the lives that we need to live. That's how we know we got the power of God in our life. Just to know His purpose, that God has a purpose for your life. To know that His presence is with you always. And that God will give you the power that you need to take that next step. How am I going to be able to do it? Somebody says, well, God promised He'd never allow life to put more on me than I can bear. Well, I'm going to tell you, there's been a lot of times I've had trials that were more than I could bear. He didn't promise you wouldn't have things more than you could bear. But what He promised was that He would give you the power that you need. Paul said, Lord, would you remove this thorn in the flesh? And God said, no. But my grace is sufficient, and I will give you my strength, and I will give you my power, and you will be able to overcome. We can do that today through Christ. I'm going to ask the musicians to come today as we sing. And I just want to say today, whatever it is you're going through, I don't know. But God knows. And God will give you the strength that you need and the power that you need to take that step. And you know, the thing about God is He doesn't give you that grace that you need tomorrow, today. He gives you the grace you need for each moment. And then tomorrow He'll give you the grace you need for tomorrow. So just trust in His goodness today.